Next up is Jessica Toth from the Solana Center for Environmental Innovation, talking about the nature cycle of organic materials.
Well, thank you for having me. If you don't know of Solana Center, we are a mission-driven organization. We've been around for 40 years, and we focus on bringing environmental education, awareness, and consulting to students, adults, businesses, governments, and other organizations. And for my talk, so I'm Jessica Toth. I'm the Executive Director of Solana Center. I've been there 10 years, 11 years now. And I'm going to focus on two topics in my 10 minutes, so I'm going to go through pretty fast. And I hope that in my 10 minutes, you will either learn something new or think about something in a different way than you have before. And I find that each of the presentations I've listened to today, I've taken something away. Hopefully you'll feel the same. And I might even ask you at the end, so listen carefully. So the two topics I'm going to touch on is the circular nature of the food system and textile management. So great overlap with what I Love It Clean San Diego is doing. So that's my picture with kids and composting and on-farm work. At the first Zero Waste, San Diego Zero Waste Symposium, I shared what was new to me then, as I was new at Solana Center, that food breaking down in the landfill is different than composting. And to me, that was a relatively new concept. And I remember looking out at the audience and thinking, is this something that everybody knows? I had been in a nonprofit, in a very different type of nonprofit prior. In the US, we waste a lot of food. And as probably you know, when it ends up in the landfill, it off-gasses very potent greenhouse gases, methane and nitrous oxide. And I'll ask you, do you all know that? Yes. Is that common knowledge? Okay, so look how far we've come in a decade. Specifically, and this was quantified in a recent report from the US EPA, landfills are the third largest source of methane from human activities. And food waste is responsible for most, 60% of the methane that's coming from landfills. And so it's a significant problem. So in the 90s, the US EPA put out and produced this food hierarchy. And basically, it's a model for how we should manage our surplus food, from most to least preferable methods. And many people riffed on that image, right? So still, it's a pyramid, and it's unidirectional, right? We're going from the most preferred to the least preferred. But they really don't honor, these models don't honor nature's cycle for managing organic material. Last October, the US EPA came out with a new model. So this is a good 30 plus years later. And this is called the Wasted Food Scale. It methodically analyzes the successively less beneficial methods for handling food surpluses, from feeding people, feeding animals, composting, anaerobic digestion. And they added a few additional pieces that weren't in the inverted pyramid, such as upcycling and leaving the food unharvested. But I would argue that this is still unidirectional, right? We're going from one endpoint, one starting point to the end, going counterclockwise around. The depiction misses the circular aspect that's intrinsic to organic material. So I propose a different schematic. I'm always thinking a little differently, but this really, I think, is so in keeping with the theme of this symposium about circular economy. So consider a food management cycle that has off-ramps and on-ramps. And I don't know how well it's coming across, but the orange are inputs and the darker blue are outputs of each area. So instead of alternative means for managing surplus food from least to most environmentally damaging, let's think about the synergistic effect of a sequence of interrelated stages, right? So we're going clockwise here. It begins with growing food in the upper left, continues around, And that food is converted as it goes around, that material, into byproducts that become outputs of that previous stage, and they become inputs for later methods. There's no waste. And that is really the beauty of organic material, right? I don't think that the EPA is saying that it should end up in the landfill or incinerated, but we don't need to even consider that option. So there are two significant differences with this type of model. It's circularity and interdependence, right? So when we eat food, a byproduct is food scrap. And that food scrap becomes an input to feeding animals, to anaerobic digestion, to composting. So it's a natural, complete cycle. And the schematic doesn't need to be static. New technologies will introduce new methods, like anaerobic digestion, right, where we're extracting the energy intrinsic in the food waste. And that's a win. It'll just make the model more robust. So the last thing that I'll talk about on this topic of food waste is how are we actually doing. So this is from ReFed organization that worries quite a bit about food waste. And currently 50% of excess food is going to landfill, sewer, incineration, or dumping. And that's over 2.5 times the amount that's going to the next higher, which is composting, the next higher method. And the actual order that we're seeing here is almost the complete reverse of what we want, right? Donation is only about 2% of what's happening with excess food. So I'm going to switch to textiles now, another system that should also be circular. So what happens to discarded foods? It was great that I got to follow the previous presentation, so you've got some ideas, and thankfully I have a slightly different approach that I'm taking to what is the problem here. So this is a desert. This is the Atacama Desert in Chile. And it's turning into to be one giant landfill full of discarded clothes. It really reminds me of the situation we were in with plastics, right? We send away our plastics and we say, it's going to some place where they're going to have a real use for it. They'll do something better with it than we can do with it here. Well, this is where it's going, a lot of it. This is actually visible from space, this desert. So I've got a lot of statistics here. 80 pounds of clothing annually per average American. 95% of all textiles could be recycled, but only 15% are donated or recycled. It's very resource intensive. Synthetics are toxic, and only about less than 1% of all clothes are made from recycled material. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. You're probably all aware of this situation. What I recently learned is that dump of clothes in Chile caught on fire in 2022, and it may have been intentional. But what do we know about clothing, right? It's not all, organic material. It's got a lot of synthetics in it. And so it's making local people sick. And it just so reminds me of the plastics problem, where we're overproducing, we're sending it away, we think we're doing the right thing. We all know that story, but this to me was relatively new. And so looking at the flows here, it's not only from consumers. A lot of the material so the thickness of these lines indicate the basic volume of material. But as you see, the biggest, thickest is that consumer to disposal. And that's the part where I'm quite worried myself. And there's very little circularity that you see here. So what can we do about it? And so similar to I Love a Clean San Diego with their clothing swap, we are going to have on March 23rd an event. And it's really about bringing awareness to the issue. So it will start with hopefully education for people to rethink how much, their purchasing behaviors. The average American typically wears a piece of clothing only 7 times. I don't know about you guys, but I'm probably not the average American, as I have things from in my closet from the 80s and 90s, but that's another story. My kids think I'm ridiculous. We'll also have at the event a clothing swap, similar to what I Love Clean San Diego has. We're also working with the wonderful Fix-It clinic that Laura Anthony runs, and so we'll have people there with sewing skills to patch and to teach us how we can take care and mend our clothes. We'll also have the ability to repurpose with different crafts for youth and for adults. And we are having difficulty finding a recycling partner, so if anybody knows anybody, any organization that has full transparency and we can be confident where the material is going, we will be partnering with them to take the excess offline. So that is what I have. Please come and visit us. Laura Anthony has a little flyer in the front about the event on the 23rd. We have more information on our website as well. Thank you very much.